Okay, guys. So between my partner and I, we own a lot of Nikon camera gear, like probably more than I need. So I thought it would be a great idea to go through it all with you and let you know what I recommend, what I love, what I've had issues with. And let's be honest, everybody loves to talk about cameras. So let's do it. I'm going to start with my Nikon point and shoots because they're my favorite. Then I'm going to go through my Nikon digicams, then SLRs, film SLRs, then digital SLRs. I'll also go through the various lenses that I own as we go through, let you know what I've used them for and which ones slap the hardest. So let's talk point and shoots. Starting off with the Nikon L35AF, which has kind of become my signature camera and what I'm known for, at least here on YouTube. I have quite a few videos covering this camera and its various models in detail, so I won't talk about this for too long, but if you want more info, you can go back to those videos. I have quite a few of these, and if I see them for a decent price on Marketplace, I always snap them up because they are prone to a lot of build quality issues. The lens in this camera is absolutely amazing, and there is just something about this camera that no other point and shoot kind of rivals, in my opinion. It has a very special look. In my opinion, the best alternative to the L35AF would be the waterproof version, just because the build quality on this is really sturdy. So you're not going to run into those same issues that the other models have. The lens isn't as good, admittedly, but, marginal, I suppose. So I would definitely opt for this if you don't want to run into all those usual L35AF problems. This camera also has a zone focus feature, which doesn't really speak to me, but if you like zone focusing or you're doing street photography, this would be a great point and shoot for that. Moving on to digicams, which is a hot topic right now. So this is the Coolpix L29, and we were kind of sleeping on this camera. We just sort of randomly had it in our collection somehow. And because it's 16 megapixels, we assumed it was a later model CMOS sensor. But Lux was doing some research, as he does, on the specs, and we discovered that it's actually a CCD sensor, which is what we all want. We were pretty excited about this as you don't normally get these kind of megapixels with a CCD sensor. But to be honest, the photos that this camera produces aren't anything particularly special, unfortunately. I think the reality is you can only get so much out of something this compact. It really is super, super tiny and pocketable. I think with digicams, the magic lies in those older CCD sensors like the Canon G2, which I have a video on as well, or the older Olympus cameras. Check out Ali's channel, 1 month, 2 cameras, for an array of cameras in those kind of sections that you will 100% be jumping on eBay and buying. So moving on to the Coolpix 5700, which is, as you can see, a bit more of a chunky boy. We got this in a bundle with our Olympus E620, which we also did a video on, and that camera is amazing in the black and white art mode. But we haven't used this, to be honest, because it's just hard to find time to use all these cameras. So if you have any experience with this or you think it's worth using, definitely comment below and let me know. So now we're going to move on to film SLRs, and we are going to talk about Nicolet first off, as that was one of my first film cameras ever. So Nicolet, in case you don't know, is kind of like an offshoot of Nikon. It's the more sort of consumer type brand, but still totally capable and fine. So this is the Nicolet EL, and this was probably the second camera that I bought, maybe first or second, I can't remember. And I got it in a little laneway in Melbourne. It was an old camera store, like full of junk, but had so many cameras in the window. So I saw this in the window and it was kind of in my price point and I thought it looked cool and vintage. So I went for it and I had a lot of issues with it. And that's kind of par for the course, I think, when you first start shooting film. The electronics in this camera have now died and the battery is behind the mirror. It's kind of like hard to find, hard to get to, and we have changed it, but no luck. The electronics are just dead. You can still use it with a mechanical shutter set at 1/25th, but I have so many other Nikon SLRs and just SLRs in general, there wouldn't be any point in kind of like roughing it and using it. It has a Nikkor C zoom lens on it, and to be honest, it's not very good. But I will never get rid of this camera because, like I said, I have a history with it and it was one of my first ones. And, I kind of long for the days of being more of a novice, I guess, like being ignorant to whether a lens is good or knowing that this camera is better than this. And the days before, everything was being hyped on YouTube. And I don't even think I owned a laptop then. I was just kind of like enjoying taking photos. I don't think I had Instagram, or if I did, it wasn't like it is now. So yeah, I'll always hang on to this one. Very special to me. So next up, we're going to talk about the Nikon FT. This one is fully functioning and I think it's a really underrated camera. If you research it, a lot of people will say it's really not that far from a Nikon F in terms of like build quality. It is super chunky and heavy, but you can find one for a really affordable price. Speaking of big and chunky, let's talk about the 80 to 200 millimeter lens that lives on this camera at the moment. So surprisingly, this actually became one of my favorite lenses just when I'm not using it because it's really heavy and it kind of just looks ridiculous. I love it when Lux, my partner, uses it and takes portraits of me because, oh my God, like they look amazing. I don't mean I look amazing. I mean like, the way it compresses everything and makes me look skinny and just so good. I just love the photos that we get from this and it's definitely worth it. I will admit the first time Lux wanted to use it and take it to the beach to take photos, I was like, this is way like OTT. Like, do we really need to be using this? And he was like, wait till you see the photos. And then I was eating my words because the photos looked really good and they were for a brand and I was really, really pleased with them. So this is definitely an amazing portrait lens. You just won't catch me using it anytime soon. The push pull thing is a bit awkward too, and just this whole kind of, it's just a little bit too phallic for me. Thank you. Just lols about the lens. So next up is the F60. I have spoken about these cameras before on the channel because I cannot drive home the point enough that these are a true bargain. The last bargain in film photography possibly. Can be picked up so cheaply and they are extremely capable. The only downside is they just look like digital cameras. And I was on a job actually recently and the person was really confused because they were like, I thought you were shooting film. That looks like a digital camera. And I had to kind of just explain to them that this was, moving towards the time where cameras were getting closer to being digital. So they kind of resemble that same look. So there are a few of these. There's the F60 and the F65. I also have an F80 as well. I think the build quality is better on the F60 than the F65, but the F65 will autofocus with later model lenses, which can be a real plus if that's something that you have in your kit. The metering in these cameras is absolutely superb. It's matrix metering, and I always just kind of feel really comfortable when I use these on auto or whatever setting because I know that the camera is going to make like the right decision. So especially for work, I have been using these a little bit. So let's talk about the lenses that I have on these cameras. So this is a 60mm macro D, which is newly acquired from Facebook. Unfortunately, the manual focus is like a little bit sort of like sticky and there is a little bit of fungus that needs to be cleaned off sooner rather than later. It's not in as good condition as it was made out to be in the ad, but I guess that's just how it goes sometimes. We have tested it on a digital camera and the images look really good, really crisp. So this is something that we bought mostly for pro work, only because we do a lot of food photography lately and I like to get like really, close up to things. And I think this macro lens will be really good for that and will really like take that up to the next level of like what we can produce. So stay tuned for a possible video on macro lenses and the uses for them. So on the F65, I have the AFS 50mm f1.8 lens. This is a lot later. It doesn't have the aperture ring anymore. So this lens is really good. Nothing wrong with it at all. Very happy, but we just have one that is better that I'll talk about later. So this one's kind of just been benched for the moment. So this is the next level up in this range. This is the F80. I have had this camera for a very, very long time. And I think this was maybe the third sort of camera I got. I had a Fujika and I had the Nikon EL that I showed you before. And then my mum found this in a thrift store in a bag with like other lenses and like all the cleaning kit and all the filters and all this other stuff in the manual. And she got it for like, I think like, I don't know, $50 or something like that. And I was super excited. And when I started using this, that's when I had more success with my film shots. Just because I could kind of see what was going on. It was like, auto loading and auto rewinding. So I didn't have all these like film loading issues, and I could put it on auto, which I really liked because then I didn't have to like learn so much, which I know is bad. And I just had a lot more success, and it gave me confidence to keep shooting, which I think is really important when you're starting out. As you can hear, it is pretty it's pretty broken, but it's another one that I won't get rid of. So this has a lot more like capabilities than the F60 and the F65, but some downsides as well. Like if you bump anything on here, like there's so much going on in terms of like different modes or like settings and things. So that would be a downside for me when I was shooting, because I would then get the film back and be like, oh, what happened halfway through there? And then realize that I'd hit something and something funky had kind of gone on, which isn't going to happen with your older sort of like vintage SLRs, I guess. So there's pros and cons to everything in life. So moving on to the more prosumer cameras, the F100. I'm really stepping up in the world here. So this is fast becoming one of our favorite cameras to use, especially with external flash. So I've been using it more and more and getting really confident with it. It's honestly just one of the most capable film cameras ever made. It's an absolute beast. And I recommended it to a fellow female film shooter who does portrait and wedding stuff. And I said to her, 100% I would recommend the F100, and she's got one and she's looking at getting another one so she can kind of like rock up with two. And I think that's a great idea, and I want to do it as well. Everything about it just feels really snappy and pro, and the autofocus is like a total dream, especially when you're like in a situation where you need to kind of react and like get the shot. So I'm really loving that. You do lose the kind of like vintage vibes because it is still in that kind of plastic realm of the, the F60 and the F65 and stuff. But if you can get past that, it's honestly, it's the best. So the lens that I have on here now is a 50mm D series f1.4, and it's super sharp. Really, really happy with this. The F100 is quite a sort of bulky body, and this lens is really compact. So I think that's great, and it's really good for shooting in low light as well. So a little note on lenses. With Nikon, you have three main categories. There are the older manual focus only lenses, the AFD series, which still have the aperture ring, so it can work on older and newer bodies. And then the G series, which no longer had the aperture ring, so they only work on the later models. There's a bunch of variations with these three groups. So what I've just said isn't like, a hard and fast rule, but generally that's kind of it. We generally prefer the D series lenses as they are the most compatible, but they do have the downside that the manual focus feel isn't as nice as a dedicated manual lens. But because we use these later model bodies, I was really hard to say, having the autofocus option is really hard to pass up. So we're getting chunkier and chunkier as we move along in this film Nikon SLR journey. This is the Nikon F4, and it's a bit of a sad story actually. So my partner bought this F4 with about 5 lenses. It was a pretty good deal, but this camera was untested, so he was obviously hoping that it would work. All of the lenses were in perfect condition, but unfortunately the camera, no matter what he does, what he tries, he just can't revive it. There was some corrosion in the battery compartment, and I think some of that corrosion has gone into the body and just done some kind of irreversible damage. So now it's basically just a prop, which I'm sure you can relate to if you are a camera hoarder like us. This camera is kind of the last of an era where cameras had the modern features but still had these analog dials. I often see the F4 in TV shows from the 90s, and if we end up with a working one for the collection, I'll be pretty happy, but it's probably not one I'll personally seek out to actually use on a regular basis. Even just holding it right now, talking to you, it's just way too heavy. So we have this 24 to 50 zoom lens that lives on the F4. And to be honest, it's not a very good lens, and I really wouldn't recommend it at all. So next up is the legendary Nikon FM2N. So this is a compact kind of alternative to the Pro F line. And I was literally just saying like it does feel really compact, especially in comparison to that F4. And with this cameradactyl grip on it, it just gives like, something else to hold on to and really nice ergonomics. This is a fully mechanical camera, which normally isn't my jam, but I feel really confident now shooting Sunny 16 and I can pretty much kind of guess, and I'm normally spot on or around about spot on. So I do feel comfortable using this. And even though I say that I don't like shooting fully manual, I realize that I do it a lot, like with my Pen FT. And I just don't really want to hold myself back by having like an external light meter and having to like mess around with all of that. So I just go by eye, and most of the time it works out. I think the more you practice that, you just kind of like get to know, and film is really forgiving too. So I'm willing to, lean into that. The one downside to this camera, and this is kind of a bit of a Nikon thing, is the advanced lever has to kind of be cocked out like this to be able to take the photo. Otherwise it locks it, which is good because then you're not going to like fire off a shot when you don't mean to. But because I shoot pretty much 90% of the time in portrait like orientation, that sticking out kind of just annoys me, like my face. But if I shoot like this, which is actually how Matt Murray holds his point and shoot, so we call it like Matt Murray, Matt Loves Cameras style, if you're watching Matt, then that kind of eliminates the problem a little bit, but doesn't feel overly natural to me. So that's my only gripe. This camera also has a very cool double exposure or multiple exposure feature that makes it like really easy to do that. And we've done it a few times and it looks really cool. So I like that about it. And I do love this camera. I've grown to love it. So at the moment, this has a 35mm f2 lens on it, which we normally adapt to our Fujifilm X-T4 to record a lot of B-roll video. But this is a really great stills lens as well, for sure. We are looking for a 28mm manual, like sort of wider angle lens to live on here at the moment. We don't shoot wide angle like that much, but I think it would be good to kind of have that option and have all our bases covered. All right, now we are moving into the digital realm. So we have a couple of different Nikon digital SLRs that we've collected over the time. This is the Nikon D90. We did have a different one, but we gave it to a friend's son who was just really interested in the cameras that we were using that day. And he was like loving using it. So we were like, you take it and go explore your interest in photography. Our good friend Matt, not Matt Loves Cameras, different Matt, he offloaded this to us, I think just because he was trying to make room for new cameras. But the D90 is a pretty capable little camera, and I think it's perfect for a beginner, someone wanting to learn about photography. So we also have a D70-100, and this is a far better camera, so it just gets a lot more use than the other one, but it's good to have options, I guess. We did actually use this D70-100 for some video work in our early videos. That was obviously before we invested in a Fujifilm X-T4. It was kind of irritating to use for video, but for stills, it's totally fine. We would love a full frame Nikon DSLR like the D700 that Ali from 1 Month 2 Cameras just reviewed. So definitely go check that video out. I just haven't seen one come up for a reasonable price at the moment. So we're just kind of like waiting it out. So on the D90, I have this 24 to 85 zoom, which I've actually used quite a bit on my F60, especially in earlier videos. It's really nice for a zoom, and that kind of focal length is really versatile. In saying that though, I used it on a job recently, and since I've been using the 50mm 1.4, it just felt like a real decrease in kind of like sharpness and overall image quality. I am all for a zoom lens. I am not a zoom snob, a lens snob. And I just think like it's really nice sometimes to have a zoom lens so you don't have to move around, especially for me. I want to get like tight crops of stuff. But I think the reason that I like them is because I normally shoot in full sun outside. So I think, the f-stop that you're at with that and just the amount of light that you have, it makes the image look, decently sharp. And as soon as you go into kind of any like lower light situation, then you really start to see the shittiness of a zoom lens. So I guess it's just how you use them. So the D70-100 currently has the 85mm f1.8 lens, which is probably my second favorite Nikon lens and one I didn't vibe with at first in a video. I did testing it out if you saw that, but now I am really loving it. The 85 to 90 millimeter focal length allows me to get really tight crops, make things look really abstract, and it's just something that I'm exploring more in my photographic style. So I'm really loving this lens. And I think it's testament to kind of like how you can use something once or twice and really hate it. And then, 6 months later or however long, you go back to it and you're like, oh, wow, I actually really like this, or it's uncovered something about my style. And I think that as much as I shit talk kind of like, gas and people like collecting all this gear and how it's more about the photo and all that kind of stuff, I do think gear can be really inspirational as well. And it can get you out of a creative rut. It can help you find your style and it can really like unlock a lot of things. So, without becoming a camera hoarder like me or spending all of your money on cameras, if you can get access to like different bits of kit or like different lenses. I used to think lenses were really boring, but the more I go and the more like I see what they can do or like how it changes your process and what you shoot and the result that you get, the more kind of interested I am becoming in that kind of stuff. So we have a bunch of other fairly kind of uninspiring zoom lenses in our collection that I will just leave out, but that's pretty much all the Nikon gear that we own. So I guess the question now is, what's next? So I said in a video a while back that I really wanted a Nikon FA, and that is still on the cards. I just haven't seen one pop up in a price that I'm comfortable with yet. Lux would really like an F6, but to justify that, we would have to sell off some camera gear as that's a pretty expensive purchase. I could definitely see myself getting a second F100. So I've got like 2 to work with on jobs. Also, I will keep grabbing the cheaper kind of F60, F65 bodies just because you see them pop up for like $20. And I think they're good to just have as a backup because the battery doors on them do kind of get really flimsy and fall off. In terms of lenses, we really just need a wide angle prime lens and then we'd be like pretty covered on all bases. It would be nice to have a few more manual focus lenses for the Nikon FM2N, but I think that's kind of more what Lux wants than what I want. So enough about my collection, over to you guys. Thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far, and please comment below and let me know what is in your Nikon collection or what you've previously owned, what you love, what you're lusting after. Let's talk about cameras in the comments section.